how do you see the future of storytelling in this embodied internet?
Imagine you are inside your favorite Netflix show. Maybe you can't change the plot so much, but you're surrounded by it. And you can move around with the characters and look at them from different angles and maybe go into certain rooms that are closed so you can explore and get different pieces of the story. And that's great, right? We love to consume media in interactive ways. These metaverse-like embodied internet experiences will facilitate a form of entertainment that I think take some of the interactive storytelling elements that are so successful with video games, but merge them with the cinematic, highly curated artistic experiences that we get from Hollywood, from these big production studios, and in ways that'll be great. That'll be transformative, for better or worse, right? Double-edged sword.
Hello world, this is SPARTIE-Cast.
Hello cast. Welcome to this special episode of SPARTIE-Cast. We are turning 30, as in 30 episodes. And I'm also not in my lab. I'm in the virtual version of my lab because we've got some sick kids at home. So I had to be around. But more importantly, this episode is all about moi. Well, not really, but instead of interviewing someone else, I am the guest on this episode. This is a crossover episode. I have a colleague, Roxana Girju, who invited me to be on her podcast, the Creative Language Technologies podcast, and speak about the metaverse. And I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity to synthesize some of what I've learned from my great guests on SPARTIE-Cast so far. Why not cross-post it? So here we are. You will, in a moment, hear my interview with Dr. Girju, and I hope find some themes that are informed by interviews with people like Timu Toke, who talked to me about his company Wolf 3D that makes cross-platform avatars, Ready Player Me, or Ryan Feldman, who works for Immersed VR that creates virtual workspaces. Even going back to my episode with Dr. Lakshmi Rattan, my dad. And we talked about the history of Bell Labs and media technologies that kind of grew into the internet, Web 1, then Web 2, then Web 3. Now that we're talking about, all of those are based on this infrastructure of increasing complexity in these telecommunication networks. So I was super excited to be able to synthesize. Also, as a professor, I love to hear myself talk. So I got to do a bit of that. And I really enjoyed doing this. Should I do more? Are you a listener? Have you listened more than once? If you have, I invite you to invite me to your interview, and maybe we can just post it here on SPARTIE-Cast, and that can be an occasional method of doing episodes here. Also, if you're a regular listener, please do our survey, bit.ly/SPARTIE survey, and mute your cell phones. Make sure your popcorn is being consumed in an inaudible way, etc., and enjoy this episode.
Hello, Robby. It's nice to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Roxana or Karina?
Roxana.
Roxana. Okay. Zoom leads us astray.
Yeah, this is good. Okay, well, let's start. So let's talk about the metaverse and Web 3.0. What are they and why should we care about them?
Okay, so the metaverse is an idea that is similar to the idea of cyberspace as introduced by William Gibson in his fiction about 30 years ago. And he used the idea the term cyberspace to describe an embodied internet. I think he called it a mutual hallucination. We just, I talk a lot about the metaverse with people, and many people do know that the history kind of comes from this fictional space. Like many of the concepts we engage with in media, science fiction authors have known these things would be our reality in the future. Even Alan Turing knew that we would be talking to computers in natural ways over a decade ago. But the metaverse is a term that grew out of Neil Stephenson's novel Snow Crash to describe a similar idea, an embodied internet. Instead of cyberspace, though, the metaverse wasn't picked up to describe the internet writ large. It does seem to have been picked up recently to describe virtual reality-based networked experiences, interoperable networked experiences. That's a mouthful of kind of jargony terms. So what do I mean by that? I mean, it's like the internet in the sense that you can sit down at some sort of technological device and connect with other people and share information through this technology, but it's normally happening, or at least it's assumed to eventually normally be happening with a virtual reality headset or an augmented reality glasses, or some sort of technology that embodies the user's full apparatus, not just our fingers to type and maybe our voice to speak, but our whole bodily movements lead to inputs and outputs that convey information that other people can use socially. So that's the metaverse. There's some key tenets, I think, involved in understanding how it works. Right now, you might think, oh, well, I know that. I've seen my kids play Fortnite or Minecraft, or I've even seen people in virtual reality walk around a place called VR chat in Avatar. So isn't that the metaverse? And the answer is it's part of the metaverse, but the vision for the metaverse is bigger. It's interoperable. And I think the easiest way to understand this is right now you can sit down at your computer and launch a web browser, and you can browse different websites. Well, in the not too distant future, you will sit down at a browser, maybe it's the same web browser, but it will allow you to browse different virtual worlds. You can call it a metaverse browser. And that might look like Mozilla Firefox. Firefox has hubs, and I believe that that's a play they're making toward the future of this 3D internet. That's another way you can think about it. But interoperability is essential here. So I get to be the same person as I go around different websites. If I log in through, let's say, my Google or my Facebook account, that kind of becomes my passport to the web. Well, in the metaverse, you will not just be the same person by profile, by cookies at the infrastructure level. You can be the same avatar. I can walk around in my Professor Robby kind of professional clothing from one virtual world to another, or maybe I want to change my avatar's clothing and be hip Robby, if such a thing exists. I haven't been hip for a few years, but you know, I get into my clubbing clothes and I go out with my friends, but it's actually the same facial structure. It's the same digital avatar of myself. Or even I change it and it's a different gender, but it's still the fundamental identity running that. The program knows this is Robby. Robby's coming along with not just these avatars and these outfits. Robby also has a wallet. Robby's traveling from virtual space to virtual space with a crypto wallet where he can spend Ethereum or Bitcoin, which more people might be familiar with, though Ethereum's pretty widely understood at this point. And then, or hundreds of others. You know, I can spend my Dogecoin both in Minecraft and use the same avatar, though less blocky, in Fortnite or in VR chat or in the hundreds of, you know, metaverse-like spaces. And once this truly is a metaverse, we'll be able to jump around in them, and then also we'll be able to spend in them. And that's an important piece of the interoperability. And I think that's a good segue to your question about the Web 3.0. Lots of people are talking about what that means. The easiest metaphor for understanding this, I think, is that the third layer of the web is the financial layer. So the bottom layer is information, just general information, transferable information. The second layer is social media, being able to tag people and hashtags with this information that you're sending on the first layer. And now the third is financial, being able to own pieces of digital content, trade those pieces of digital content with each other, and that is in many ways completely transformative. You might think, oh, right now I can spend money. I can give someone my credit card number and they can charge me to buy my groceries or to buy this song, which is a digital artifact. I own that song through that transaction. Yes, that's true. But you can't own the only copy of that song. But through technologies like the blockchain, which is essentially a public ledger of digital artifacts and the transactions around those digital artifacts, through the blockchain and through something called NFTs, which many of you might be familiar with, non-fungible tokens, you can own a single copy of a digital artifact. And that means I could own my avatar in its entirety. I could own, in the same way that I own things in the real world that other people can't have, I can own those. And that changes the nature of trade and value on the internet, because if there's only one, it's a limited resource. So it retains a value. It can't just be copied. It retains a value that other people might be willing to pay for, because if I transfer ownership to you, then I no longer have it. And I think that's about the limit of my ability to explain.
Yeah. No, this was great. This is great. It was very well explained so that everybody understands. But we are actually going to get to the idea of ownership a little bit later on, because I have some questions touching on that. But let's first talk about this 3D internet that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. What exactly does it entail? When you say 3D, is obviously you actually consider the visual modality, but is it going to go beyond that? Does it involve sound? Does it involve smell, taste, touch?
That's a great question. I mentioned the visual elements, 3D in the metaverse, but it's not restricted to that. And this is an important point that I touch on in my avatar psychology class. What is an avatar anyway? It is not just a visual representation of a human. It's a mediated representation through any medium of interaction, not necessarily even digital. And so the reason that definition is important is it allows us to be more inclusive of different sensory experiences in our research, in our kind of production, development, design. As we think about what is an avatar, we can also think generally what is a virtual experience. So the way my voice is coming to you right now, I believe is unmodulated, but it's still digital. Zoom is transferring, the physical waves, the sound waves into a physical piece of hardware that then translates it to digits, that translates it back to the physical hardware, back to you. Along that process, in that channel, there could be a modification. I could add a filter to make me sound a little more masculine, or to mask my age, etc. And all of that becomes part of the avatar. And so then in the virtual environments, absolutely, we can think about other sensory experiences besides vision as being part of the metaverse. As for the other senses, though, taste and smell are the hardest. Maybe you've heard of smell-o-vision, where they try to at least have a few different smells that get induced or get introduced to the participant or to the user as they're engaging with the virtual world. You walk into a field and somebody puts a dryer sheet underneath your nose, and maybe that increases immersion. I believe that's probably quite difficult to do well. Though there are technologies, I imagine, that are more advanced doing that. But touch is the other one, and that's going to be the big one, haptic feedback. So in virtual reality, as I'm using the controllers, that's a movement. So what sense am I using? It's proprioception. I'm feeling where my body is. My body schema is an extension of my mind. There's no, or in our field at least, we don't think of a mind-body duality. We think of cognition as being fully embodied. And so the words that I say, the kind of visual appearances that I give off through my nonverbal gestures, they're all part of my kind of thinking apparatus. And now the digital information in the metaverse can influence how I interact with the controllers. They shake. That's the obvious one. All my students go to that one immediately. I'm playing a game, I get shot, the thing shakes. Absolutely. As these technologies become more advanced, you could imagine many different types of physical interactions. We could shake hands as I hold on to something. Okay, I'm holding my son's Lego here. Oh, I just shot an X-wing bullet. This could be attached to an arm. It could give me some force feedback, and like a joystick, I could feel like I was shaking your hand. There are many different ways in which physical interaction can be embodied in VR. There's a pen that this has been studied by the VR lab at Stanford, Jeremy Bailenson virtual human interaction laboratory. The study's a little older, but they had this haptic feedback pen, and people were using it in physical space to look at a screen and clean off dirt on people's faces. And what they found was the amount of pressure people used to clean off the dirt on the virtual faces differed depending on the race of the face that you were looking at, the skin color. So you can infer a little bit about bias as a measure of implicit bias. So back to your question, the metaverse will embody other senses besides vision, certainly audio. And if you think about it, that's been there for a long time. And haptics is the next frontier. And who knows, maybe once we can plug our VR headsets into the olfactory areas of our brains, then we won't need analog kind of inputs to our noses and our mouths, and you will even get those things as well.
Yeah, for sure. So some are actually easier to implement in the metaverse and some more challenging. And yet there are some people who define the modern metaverse as an awesome online social experience. And in order to provide an awesome online social experience, we actually need both tangible and intangible experiences. And some of the senses, actually all the senses are important here. So I see the future a little bit broader, and I think the senses are going to be implemented, will play a major role in the metaverse. And not only that, the cross-modality among the senses will play a very important role in creating these user experiences. But talking about this, as I said, the metaverse is expected to give users an even better immersive experience. That's the whole idea. It's one of the big goals of this industry, meaning provide a much stronger connection with friends, relatives, co-workers, and even places in a more natural way. Now, of course, this space might not be 100% real, like the real world, but will be a place where people want or would like to spend time in. So we will be able to curate our realities, it seems, meaning we could add things, we could decide what things to delete, meaning things that we like, things we don't like, choose what to see in this virtual space, what not to see, what to hear, what not to hear, and also smell, taste, touch, and as well. So with the metaverse, let us sort ourselves into our own reality tunnels. Should we be worried about that? Since I would be able to really filter out what I don't want to see or what I don't want to experience, how would this work out? What kind of...
That is an excellent question. So I'll take two steps back and then come forward to this. I agree with you that all of the senses eventually will be essential in the metaverse. I just think technologically it's going to take us more time to develop the interfaces for smell and taste. But but even touch, we'll get to it slowly. And as that's the one that's maybe at the turning point at the moment, I'd like to focus on that one for this question. I think it's a great question because it's a metaphor for the kind of echo chamber problem with social media. We went from being a society where information was flowing in an unfiltered way relative to the last few years. So if a news channel put out a broadcast, it was a broadcast, right? It hit all the ears, most of the ears. Certainly in my field, communication, we've known that people selectively tend to messages that align with their previous attitudes. You choose to read the Wall Street Journal. If you're a little more right-leaning, you choose to read the New York Times. If you're a little more left-leaning, that's been around for a long time. But because the algorithms of social media are so adept at recognizing trends in your behavior and then feeding you what they think you'll like, we've noticed that people get cut off from exposure to perspectives that are unlike their own. And we end up in these echo chambers, so to speak, meaning everybody agrees with you in your little circle, and you were rarely confronted with the conflict, the kind of easy to address conflict and ideas that allows you to think more broadly. Okay, so that's where we are now. And you're asking the question, what about the same dynamic, but in our sensory experiences of the metaverse? Will we end up with people who filter their experiences? This is truly a sci-fi question right here. Like we will. I definitely agree. We'll end up with people, with communities, I should say, who value certain social norms that also relate to their sensory experiences that are completely unlike what most people are doing. Is that bad or is that good? On the one hand, it can be great. It can be great. Let's say there are communities that are ostracized for reasons that are beyond their control. You're born into a certain body type or sexual orientation or gender identity, right? So having safe spaces where you can go and explore social interactions with like-minded people, we imagine that to be great in our kind of liberal, progressive social mindset. At the same time, the flip side, like just thinking on the social media side, there are hate groups. There are groups that are harmful to themselves, harmful to each other. In a sensory experience world, I'm thinking to the show Orphan Black. Do you know this show?
No, I don't.
It's a science fiction show about a woman who's a clone and meets her clone sisters, and they kind of uncover their past and the history of the program that brought them into being. And one of the groups that's involved in their creation is, I'm losing the name for themselves, but they are kind of bioexperimentalists. So they find ways to grow tails on themselves and to otherwise augment their bodies. And they're presented in the show, at least, as being a little bit too extreme, a little bit too unnatural, too much like cyborgs or even monstrous kind of self-creations, Frankenstein's avatars. So I imagine that kind of thing might happen where these cultural norms of humanity change, and that might be scary to people. And is that good or bad? Like with all, I am not as prescient as many of my colleagues about these things. So the simplest answer I think here is that, like with all technology, it's a double-edged sword. And as scholars in our position as as people who are not just writing academic papers, but also speaking to the public, I think we have a responsibility to promote the positive effects and to try to diminish those effects which we believe are unethical or otherwise harmful to society, to our ability to thrive and survive. Though, of course, there are many different ethical frameworks from which you can kind of base your judgment. So in general, I would say neither good nor bad as a phenomenon in itself, but the resulting phenomena will be good or bad depending on your ethical framework. And so let's focus on the good. Hello, listener. It's me, but I'm an avatar. You probably learn about avatars in this podcast, but you can actually try them out, not just in video games, but in spaces like Zoom. I'm using Zoom to record this right now. This avatar I created with Ready Player Me. Remember in episode a long time ago, I talked to Timo Toke, the CEO of Wolf 3D. That's the company that makes Ready Player Me. I took a screenshot of myself with my camera, a selfie, I should say, and I created an avatar automatically, customized it in their app. Then I posted it in Animaze. That's the software I'm using right now. They are the sponsor of this message, and they are giving a 50% discount on subscriptions. You can try it for free, but if you want to subscribe, you enter SPARTIE Lab as the discount code. That's SPARTIE Lab. So you can use a Ready Player Me avatar, like I mentioned. You can also upload your own VRM or live 2D models, or you can make avatars right in Animaze. For example, you could use the Doge avatar. And I don't know, I mean, it might have seemed like a strange thing at first, but Dogecoin is still making bucks. But you could use the Doge avatar or one of their very cool anthropomorphic animals, such as the Fluffo, the raccoon. Totally detailed. Look at this. It's so responsive. People use these types of avatars to stream or go to Zoom meetings or go to court cases and say, I am not a cat. There are also two-dimensional avatars like this raccoon, or more anthropomorphic avatars that aren't even animals, like this cute pandemic virus right here. Corey the COVID. Maybe this one won't win you too many friends. I really like Kathy. She's quite a catch. You could choose whichever avatar you like. And then you could even apply some of the concepts like the Proteus effect or other phenomena related to avatars in the workplace to your uses of these avatars based on what you've learned in this podcast. And once again, if you want to try it out, go to Steam, download Animaze, try it for free, and then if you want a subscription, you can get 50% off for a limited time by entering SPARTIE Lab in the discount code. Check it out.
The question that remains is, who decides how are we allowed to represent ourselves in this space? And how are we filtering our realities? Who decides what we are allowed to delete and keep? Who decides what we're allowed to own? So this actually sends us to the next question, which is, how is this virtual space governed currently? How are its contents moderated at this point? And what kind of experiences does and can the metaverse give users? Again, currently.
Currently the metaverse is the wild, wild west. And so the governance structures are just emerging, right? The rule of law is very libertarian. Cash rules everything around me. Cream, get the money. Dollar bill, y'all, to quote Wu-Tang. So there's so much money going into these metaverse technologies, and the amount that people are spending, let's say, for example, on NFTs, seems ridiculous to me as someone who doesn't have hundreds of like Ethereum or Bitcoins or whatever is making these people so rich and able to spend $10,000 on a single piece of digital artwork, or millions even.
Right.
So it's the market. That's what's governing much of this. And for better or worse, I think that's great, because it's allowing some of the business models and ideas about how the metaverse should operate, how NFT should be shared and traded, et cetera. It's letting them fail fast and pivot. And it's truly a Silicon Valley model, which, as we know, is quite successful at experimenting and eventually finding those unicorns that do change the world. At the same time, there's a danger in this model. There's a danger that we end up with, to use a Web 2.0 metaphor again, to help us think about 3.0. We end up with an accumulation of user data without user ownership over that data, that shifts power dynamics in a direction that's harmful to society. You could argue that maybe starting with Cambridge Analytica, we saw this happening. We saw companies taking advantage of the troves of data that Facebook, Google, et cetera, are collecting on users, and taking it from a simple advertising-oriented business model, which on paper is completely consistent with the way mass media has been supplemented for over 100 years, but then twisting it into mechanisms for political manipulation and spreading false information, the whole fake news thing, et cetera. So there's a huge danger in losing control, like you said, over ownership of data. And now the data is going to be even more massive and discomforting. If I'm wearing a VR headset and navigating a virtual space, so much about me. Whether or not I have a physical disability. You could probably predict whether I will develop certain physiological conditions, right? If I have some sort of tremor, a lot of these, with machine learning, a lot of these trends are predictable, and these aren't necessarily things that I want to give away. Or maybe, it's sexual orientation, right? You can tell from where someone looks, and then if somebody doesn't want to discuss that, or if the machine learning models are wrong, but the predictions are based on that information, and then somehow that information is being used in ways to influence people against their will, or selling that data becoming public in ways that make people uncomfortable. There's a great risk of those things happening. So I think we have a long time before we see Web 3.0 being governed like a utility. Web 1.0 is certainly seen as a utility. ISPs, right? These are mostly, they come from the telecom world. ISP, internet service providers. They're used to being treated as a utility. They're used to governments telling them what their rates can and can't be, and how to manage their legal monopolies or oligopolies in those cases. Facebook is grappling with that right now. And I think they're in for a reckoning. I think they will become regulated as some form of utility. Why? Because they do provide a public good. They do have a large amount of power. So I don't know exactly how that will play out. We're just seeing that now. But eventually, maybe Web 3.0 and the metaverse will be governed in that way. But it's going to be even harder. If you can't imagine the challenge of a congressperson who grew up watching black and white television, now wrapping their minds around social media and Twitter and TikTok even, right? Like, I can barely wrap my mind around TikTok, and I've been studying media since I was 20 years old. And so it's hard. And so governing that is going to be hard. NFTs in the metaverse is even more decentralized. There is no Mark Zuckerberg to bring on the stand and say, what's happening at your company? Because everybody owns their own little piece of it. there are companies, but if you get rid of one, there's so many of them. It's complete. It's like going from a concentrated media ownership model, such as telephony, to a complete free market with hundreds of players. And so it's scary.
It is scary and interesting at the same time, especially if we actually come from a scientific point of view. And as you said, it's always a double-edged sword. Any technology, in fact, has been like this. But I think this is the right time, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, by the way, that this is the right time to discuss this, because how do we negotiate governance, right? As you mentioned, Facebook. Well, right, so we know that earlier this year, Mark Zuckerberg announced that Facebook will become a metaverse company, while also know that Apple is also moving in this direction. Snap intends to use AR for shopping experiences. Apple is going to come up with some gadgets for this space next year, and other companies will continue. So more and more companies are getting into this space. So this actually means that we have to take this more seriously. And in fact, I would say somewhat more recently, the Epic Games CEO, Tim Sweeney, said that we actually need to have an open metaverse. And we know that Epic actually launched an antitrust lawsuit against Apple to eliminate the about 30% App Store platform fees for all developers, right?
And I believe they won that lawsuit, or maybe they lost the lawsuit, but Apple's still being required to eliminate those fees in the future, right?
I don't really know what the real outcome was, but this marks a very important point in the history of the metaverse. And many lawsuits in the future. I'm not a law person, so I have a disclaimer here, but my belief is that many law people in the future, or many such companies in the future, will take this as a precedent. But Tim Sweeney says that we actually need to make platforms for games to be more open. That's his idea of an open metaverse. So
I think there's an ironic twist in this dynamic. Your question is about governance, but also embedded in governance is standards. I teach this in my my intro media class as a common trend when we see new media industries emerge. For example, radio. We discovered the technology of being able to send wireless radio signals. And early on, people are just generating their own technologies. They're using them as they please. The Titanic sinks. And this is a catalyst for recognizing that we need some governance around radio. We need to make sure that it's being used for safe communications, at least in ship-to-shore or ship-to-ship technologies. At the same time, shortly after, about 10, 15 years later, we end up with the, I think it's the Federal Radio Communications Act of 1927, which creates standards for radio technologies. So now radios should be able to interoperate more clearly. We don't have a wide range of kind of radio headset technology types in the same way that we have to choose DC or AC with electricity. These standards of technological interoperation are essential for promoting a mass medium. So once everyone knows, okay, I'm going to use a USB plug for my computers, we don't have to have 27 different plugs. It becomes more efficient for consumers. The cost of producing an additional unit of my product goes down. That allows me to reduce my price, which means more people buy it. This is called economies of scale, or we call it media economies of scale in these media technologies. That is the type of governance that we see happening at W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, which is essential for facilitating the interoperability of the web. So I often go to the web as our metaphor for thinking about the metaverse, because we need computers to talk to each other. That's the internet, right? We have standards. TCP/IP, certain protocols for just making sure they send and receive signals in a way that we can all understand. Doesn't matter if they're being made by Microsoft or Apple, etc. But I'm not sure that's the same thing as governance, at least as how I interpret it. In some ways, I see Sweeney's call for openness and interoperability as a call for opening the doors to the wild, wild west. Like, here's a good way to think about it. If we're using the US geography as a metaphor, we've got this undeveloped Western land where we know there's some gold, there's some people, but I want the government to build roads out there. I don't want the government, so I can go out there and make money. I don't want the government to send police and military out there, though. That's governance that I think these companies are not asking for, that Facebook certainly doesn't want. And I do know that Fortnite or Epic thinks of Fortnite and maybe some of its other properties as being a part of the metaverse. Have you seen? You don't just play Fortnite. They have concerts in Fortnite. Recently, my kids went to the Ariana Grande concert.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That was so fun. They even let me have the controller for a few minutes, which is amazing. So, you're flying around on this like rainbow colored pinata like donkey thing, while this massive Ariana Grande, almost like you're in Gulliver's Travels or something, she's walking around singing, and you're a part of that experience. And that's a type of entertainment that goes beyond just gaming, shooting enemies, right? Fortnite is a great platform for this. So is Facebook, so is VR chat and Second Life. We've been thinking about this for a long time. They want governance in the sense that they want infrastructure so they can interoperate, so that they can send more people to the wild, wild west. So they can build the hotels and the homes and the roads and the businesses and make money off that. At the same time, they know it's going to be even harder to be policed out there by governments. They know that the technological infrastructure for cryptocurrencies it's in theory anonymous. They're not really, but people can trade without being tracked. They can certainly trade without a middle entity like a bank. So the free market will reign, and that's a great opportunity for companies that are well poised to make tons of money off this. So there's my somewhat cynical, somewhat historical response.
Yes, that's true. Well, there is a lot to say and in this space, and also a lot to research in this space. So now let's move to another point of great importance for this metaverse, which is storytelling. How do you see the future of storytelling in this embodied internet? Mark Zuckerberg somewhat recently used this term.
Yeah, the embodied internet. That's another way to think about the metaverse and storytelling. Imagine you are inside your favorite Netflix show. Maybe you can't change the plot so much, but you're surrounded by it. And you can move around with the characters and look at them from different angles, and maybe go into certain rooms that are closed, so you can explore and get different pieces of the story. And this is your favorite Netflix show. Let me think of one that I really like. I mean, it doesn't have to be Netflix. It can be Disney Plus. All right. So I'm in Mandalorian, and I get to watch the battle scenes from different angles. And that's great, right? We love to consume media in interactive ways. We are inherently lazy at times. I don't want to be on my treadmill running and shooting all night long. Sometimes you want to sit on the couch and relax. And so these metaverse like embodied internet experiences will facilitate a form of entertainment that I think take some of the interactive storytelling elements that are so successful with video games, but merge them with the cinematic highly curated artistic experiences that we get from Hollywood, from these big production studios, and in ways that'll be great. That'll be transformative, for better or worse, right? Double-edged sword. So I can give you an example. Recently, in my last podcast episode, I interviewed people from Upworlds and Metaverse Studio. They make art galleries. Well, Upworlds hosts different virtual worlds, and Metaverse has an art gallery. And during the episode, they told me they were going to have a tarot card reading. And so I went after the episode. I put on my Quest and I walked around. And not only was there art on the walls, which you could interact with, and music that went along with these different elements. This was all through Mozilla Hubs. But there was also a host who was an actor, a performer, who did a tarot card reading for the audience. And it was so cool. I was part of that kind of performative experience in virtual reality, surrounded by this new scene. And to me, that represents a new model of entertainment. That's not quite a movie. That's not quite a play. That's not quite a game. It's a merger of all of those things.
So in such an immersive experience, what do you think is going to be the extent of human autonomy and agency in these environments?
We love our autonomy, especially here in the West. And so I think it depends on the context, autonomy and agency. Even when we're watching TV shows, I have autonomy and agency in the sense that I choose what I want to watch. At the same time, there are algorithms that influence my experience and reduce that autonomy and agency, such as the recommendation systems for the show I should watch next. In a video game, similar thing, right? I have autonomy and agency within the constraints of that coded space. I believe we will continue, just like in the real world, we have limited levels of autonomy and agency, even in our physical apparatus, our bodies, right? We are often responding to cues that lead to automatic responses. We're driven by heuristics. And so the opportunities for true free will and choice, though this is getting into the philosophical question, I think are somewhat limited. And virtual worlds are no different, except that the environments are highly designed with those interactions in mind. So who knows, maybe you'll feel even more autonomous and agentic in virtual worlds because the designers will make you feel that way. Which is ironic, but perhaps that'll be more fulfilling than our current world, where I feel like, oh, my boss is always telling me what to do. My kids are driving me nuts. My partner is not supportive enough. Oh, I go into this virtual world and I'm completely free to do as I please, right? That's super ironic because you are in a virtual environment that's literally been coded for people to constrain your behaviors according to the design. Whereas the natural world in theory is natural, but I actually don't think the physical versus digital distinction here is as important as kind of the human experience in these spaces.
Yes, absolutely. So let's go back to your lab, SPARTIE. What does it stand for actually, and in what way the work you and your research group do at your lab connect with the metaverse?
Sure, yeah. So it stands for the social and psychological approaches to research on technology interaction effects.
That's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. And it's a play off of our mascot, SPARTIE, the MSU mascot, spelled with a Y though, and technology interaction. So social and psychological technology interaction essentially just means people using technology. And we tried to keep it broad, even though I focus very much on avatars within virtual spaces. I don't actually study a single technology. I study the interaction with those technologies. The technology itself can change. So I'm interested in the psychological effects of using these technologies such as the Proteus effect. That's one that I've studied significantly in my lab, looking at how people are influenced by their avatar's identities. If my avatar's taller, I'll negotiate more aggressively. If my avatar's an inventor, looks kind of intelligent, I'll come up with more creative ideas in a brainstorming task. So not just replicating those effects, but understanding why they happen and in what context they're happening the strongest. So this is the actual lab space. Well, this is a picture because I couldn't get into the lab today, but we'll bring participants in, we'll sit them in front of that big screen there and have them play some games, and we'll manipulate something about that game. Half of them, this is a study that we did not too long ago, we'll have them create an avatar that represents yourself, how you actually are. The other half, we say, create an avatar that represents the story of the game. So it's Destiny. That's what we use in that one study. So it's a space shooter. And then before they participate in playing the game, we introduce a prompt about a stereotype, a gender stereotype. This is something else I've studied because I'm interested in toxicity and gender stereotypes and kind of the harmful effects in games. So we introduce a toxic message, like you suck at gaming, or a sexist toxic message, like women shouldn't be playing, this kind of thing. And we see how does that affect not just their behavior in the game, and not just their behavior in the game interacting with the avatar that they're using, but also after the game, how do they feel about non-game things? So how well do women do in computer science, in math, in engineering? And what we find is this is consistent with Claude Steele's stereotype threat theory, which has been supported in hundreds of studies. When we trigger a stereotype about gender, it makes people perform worse, especially if that stereotype is subtle. They don't really notice it. But now with avatars, if we reduce the emphasis on their own gender, so if we have them make the avatar that's consistent with the game story instead of themselves, we can buffer against that effect. So the fundamental conclusion of that study, and then many others that I've done that are always all leading toward this argument, is that avatars are perhaps the most essential piece of the psychological experience of a virtual world, of the metaverse, because they are the container for your self-concept. And your self-concept is constantly changing. When I'm with my parents, I act differently than when I'm with my friends, right? So your self-concept is cued by what you see in your avatar, and we can use that as technologists, as designers, game designers, metaverse designers, to lead people toward behaviors that we want. Hopefully that isn't just getting people to buy more crap, right? Like maybe, hopefully it's reducing toxicity in virtual spaces, finding ways to make people feel a little bit more responsible for maintaining a reputation, or for not promoting sexual or racist or other stereotypes that we know are harmful. And we know they're not just harmful to the game, they're harmful to attitudes about men and women in society in terms of STEM and gender effects, in terms of race and abilities in intellectual or academic contexts. We know there's so much harm that is done by the toxicity in these spaces. And so the SPARTIE Lab has been working toward this argument that we can reduce the harm by thinking about design principles, particularly with avatars, but with other contexts of these virtual spaces as well.
Yeah, this is a great space to be in, for sure, research-wise at least. So how can our listeners learn more about SPARTIE and where they can find you?
They can come to our website, SPARTIE Lab. Just Google SPARTIE Lab, SPARTIE Lab. Maybe we can put it in the episode notes. I have a podcast too. Yeah. This is for your podcast. We're cross podcasting here, which is so cool. Roxana, thank you. I never get to talk on my podcast. I'm always interviewing people, so my listeners might be very tired of me by now, and I don't know, maybe maybe this is a good idea to do in the future. Maybe I'll ask other people to interview me, but I really do appreciate this opportunity to talk about my attitudes, because I'm constantly learning from other people. Is that kind of what you like about your podcast? You're learning these
Yeah, well, that's the idea of podcasting. We learn ourselves, and also we create a community around these ideas, and also we promote other people. And I also like in the future to bring in people who probably are just at in the early phases of their careers, but they've done something interesting that they have to share with the world. So this is something that it really brings a lot of joy. And again, it creates a community. So thank you so much for your time, Robby. I really appreciate you being on the show. This was great.
Thank you so much. Just on that last point, one thing I've done, which I really enjoy, and I didn't do this on purpose, is occasionally I have a student spotlight on my podcast. And I find that actually gets a lot of play. I usually do it when I can't find a guest on time, and I'm like, quick, student, please, can I interview you? But those do get some good circulation.
And we learn a lot from our students as well. So
that's my favorite part.
That's a great idea.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for allowing me to repost this on SPARTIE-Cast, and I hope we talk soon.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about the metaverse as much as I enjoyed hearing myself speak. And I also hope that what I'm saying is not too vague. I know that at times I try to hedge my arguments. Technology is a double-edged sword. In other words, I don't know if it's good or bad, right? Like, you could critique that response and say, Robby, take a stand, please. And, you know, if I were pressed to truly take a stand, I would probably skew positive. I maybe have a naive faith in the human condition, the ability to eventually right our wrongs and improve our situation, though it takes time and generations, and there are ups and downs. But I believe through the ages that technology has made our lives better. And so I'm optimistic about the metaverse. Will some bad stuff go down? Probably. That's okay. I mean, the bad stuff isn't okay, but in the long run, I think it's okay. I think it's okay that we will probably have to deal with accumulation in power in terms of owning our data or controlling our financial interactions, accumulation in power over those things that might not be great for everyone in society at that moment, because I am optimistic that we will correct, that our society, our technologists, our policymakers, our professors, our vibrant students will create cultures that respond to and even proactively guide us toward positive outcomes. Kumbaya. Let's all connect the world in one massive network of happiness through the metaverse. All right, so that's our episode for the day. Thank you very much for paying attention, especially during these trying times of October, as we all get ready for weather. Well, not we all. If you're in the global south, then maybe it's totally different. But as people at my latitude get ready for weather change, an increasing number of viruses, such as the one that's ravaging my home right now and keeping me at home. Good luck with all of that. And of course, the virus, the COVID virus, which is not what we have. Our kids have a stomach flu, but we're fortunate for that. And we're fortunate that vaccines are available. And, you know, we can't all just live in the metaverse. even though it might seem like a good option, as we know, Wade Watts was not living in a great world, even though the metaverse there was pretty awesome. It really matters what the world around you is like. So let's pay attention to that too, and maybe find ways to use NFTs and Web 3.0 to enhance our environmental sustainability, our social structures. Gosh, really going pro-social on this one. I've already blabbed at you for super long. Thanks for listening. Have a great evening or morning or whatever time of day or planet you're on.
Thank you for tuning into SPARTIE-Cast. Goodbye, world.